So I just got word that this presentation may extend out to 3:30, and it's rather lengthy, so if you get bored, feel free to leave. But I think it's actually very interesting stuff, so I hope you stay and definitely provide me some feedback as well. So why me? What am I doing in Poland? So I was born here, and I left when I was very young, and for the past 14 years I've been helping Silicon Valley entrepreneurs meet their dreams, helping them raise funds. As Alex mentioned, I started off as a lawyer. Today I consider myself an entrepreneur with legal expertise, and that enables me to really cut through a lot of the things that lawyers cannot cut through, and that's a very competitive advantage to the people that I work with. So I'd like to pass that on. It's part of a patriotic duty of mine. That's why I'm wearing the white and red shirt today. And I can speak to you what investors look for in Silicon Valley from Polish companies, and that's from experience because I've been helping Camille, who was just on track 1, raise funding, as well as Fido Labs, which has done very well with some Silicon Valley investors on Sand Hill Road. So that's my background, and without further ado, there's a lot of information here. If anybody needs the slide deck afterwards, I'm happy to provide it. One thing I would request from each of you is please connect with me on LinkedIn, because part of being here at Bitspiration is being networked, and if you have something that is of value, well, then you'll know who to reach out to when you have some questions. So I'll certainly accept your request, and I'm looking forward to staying in touch. So, as Alex mentioned, I have 14 years top-notch experience. These are some of the companies I've worked with. I've helped founders raise everything from $25,000 to sell a company for $6 billion. I've seen the full gamut. Why Poland is the right place right now? So, all of you know that EU funding is flowing into Poland to help bring about R&D and infrastructure. Those things are macro trends that make Poland a very positive place from a nationalistic point of view. Polish companies are already being funded. There are over 2,000 Polish entrepreneurs who consider themselves CEO founders. AngelList has 500 active Polish startups on their platform. Mattermark lists 1,800 Polish startups, and there have already been multiple million-dollar financings, some of which I've helped with. So Sequoia's famous question is, why now? Some of you probably are not aware that Poland is the number 15 country for internet penetration with 25 million people. That's a statistical competitive advantage that enables Polish entrepreneurs to target Poland as its initial market for a minimum viable product and then go ahead and expand globally. Even more importantly, Poland is number 8 when it comes to smartphone penetration. Almost 22 million people currently use smartphones in Poland, and this is a little known fact, but Poland is number 5 when it comes to mobile usage as a percentage of total usage of the internet. So Polish entrepreneurs, the Polish population is signed on to mobile, using mobile, and that's something that entrepreneurs should be able to use and leverage as a resource and advantage. So let's get technical. One thing that I'll warn you about, my slides are super detailed. They have a lot of information. I think most of the slides I've seen this past week do not have that information. They have one picture and then the speaker speaks to the content. So this is my obligatory slide like that, and from here on out, be prepared to be overwhelmed. But once again, if you need the presentation, I'm more than happy to share it. So an average investor in Silicon Valley spends 3 minutes, 44 seconds on a pitch deck. What does it take to design a successful pitch deck? An average length is 19 pages, the frequency of which the slides that are incorporated in there include team, 100% of the time, product and problem, almost all of the time. One thing that's not generally included, particularly for seed financing companies, is financials, because it's just too early on. There's a recommended deck ordering. When you think about a startup, you should really think about a company purpose or mission statement, or what it is that is its vision, and that's been repeated throughout, whether it's Marvin Lau from 500 Startups, or Keith Torre from his fund, or from any other of the entrepreneurs that have been talking these past 2 days. Vision, mission, purpose is very, very important. Then you need to talk about what the problem is and what the solution is. And as Reid Hoffman points out, end with the team 100% of the time. How long does it take to raise funding in Silicon Valley? I think that these figures are actually much lower than is in fact the case, but I think it gives you a good idea when you really start full steam on funding, it takes about 12 weeks, and there's a lot of variation in that process, and usually it takes way longer than expected. I heard an earlier presentation this afternoon from Camila Dombrovsky, who said, it's a sprint, not a marathon. That's true. You need to get it done as quickly as possible, but be prepared for it to take much longer than you would expect. And one thing to point out, there's a question whether angel funding or seed funding is a better way to go. Seed funding is usually much more efficient. It takes less time, you have to meet with fewer investors. So if you go ahead and focus on seed stage investment funds, you're likely to be able to close your deal earlier, and you're likely to get a lot more feedback. Individual angel investors are hard to group together, a little bit like herding cats. And here is where we can talk about the Series A crunch. It's alive and well in Silicon Valley. So even if you go and get seed funding, only 9 seed rounds exist for every Series A round. So this figure that you hear, 1 in 10 startups make it, it's 1 in 10 startups per stage. So even if you're lucky enough to be the 1 in 10 who gets seed funding, then you need to be lucky enough to be, or good enough to be, the 1 in 10 that gets Series A funding. You're already 1 out of 100. After that, it's 1 out of 10 again, 1 out of 10 again. To become a unicorn, it's probably 1 in 10,000, 1 in 100,000. That's very consistent with some of the other presentations we've heard today. For example, Mark Andreessen recently said that Andreessen Horowitz sees 3,000 pitch decks every year. They invest in 15, and they expect 1 to be a billion-dollar company. That's 1 in 3,000. And they see the best ones. So what does your presentation have to talk about? Here's my obligatory Mark Andreessen quote. Everybody else who's presented the past 2 days has had one, so will I. In a great market with lots of real potential customers, the market pulls product out of the startup. Conversely, in a terrible market, you can have the best team in the world and the best product in the world, and you're still going to fail. What are examples? Disk drives. They were taken over by cloud storage about 10 years ago. It did not matter if you were the best disk drive manufacturer, the most lean operations, and had the best management team, where you were based in Taiwan and you produced these globally. It didn't matter, because when cloud computing came over, all of those disk drive companies went away. Another example, let's look back 100 years ago. Horse and carriage buggies. If you were competing in horse and carriage buggies and a car came along, it didn't really matter how good your operations were. You were going to be out of business. There is one exception to that, and that is if you're absolutely the best of your breed, you can survive. And the best manufacturer of horse and carriages back from 100 years ago still supplies the king and queen of England with their horse and carriage buggy, and their profit margins are much, much higher than any automobile manufacturer out there. Rapid growth, absolutely. So maybe Mark Andreessen is such a premier investor that he does not need to look at traction, because he sees where the world will be in 5 to 10 years. But really, for 90+% of investors, they need to see that your product resonates with a consumer, that you have a product market fit, and that you're able to grow. And a basic rule of thumb to remember is 30% growth per period. And the period depends on where you are in your startup stage. So if you're a very early stage startup, you should be growing 30% per month. If you're a later startup, 30% per quarter. And if you're all the way up to almost a public company, it might be 30% a year. 30% is a great rule of thumb per period. And the most important thing to remember in keeping and retaining customers is to watch your churn rate. Retention, or the number of users, consumers, customers that stay and use your product over time, that's an incredibly important metric for venture capitalists and investors. And the churn, CHURN, of your customers, the ones that leave, is something that they will want to pay attention to as well. So those numbers are something that you need to have on the top of your head, because you will be asked. Scale. So we talked about how to build a unicorn and why it's important to do so. It was the first presentation on Monday. The $1 billion startup club is alive and well. There were 41 companies in January 2014. In February 2015, there were 73, and it was quoted yesterday there are 94. So these valuations are very high, but it depends on the beholder of whether they're fair or not. Effectively, large capital venture funds have replaced the public markets as funding for later stage startups. Predictability. So one thing that's super important is recurring and visible revenue streams. I heard Nav's presentation a little earlier today. He said focus on your users, understand where your users are found, keep hitting the same kind of users to gain more. This is the predictability of a recurring and visible revenue stream and lifetime return customers. Think about long-term customer value and whether they are making a purchase once or whether they're coming back to your site, to your product again and again. And then one of the most common pieces of advice that people get in terms of growing user base early on is that you have to go and recruit users by hand. And in fact, one of the reasons why I'm here in Poland right now at Bitspiration is to recruit users by hand in order to try a new product, which is Silicon Valley Counsel, a platform for this kind of specific knowledge to help startups grow. I'll talk about that a little bit later. Product and customer diversity. Again, the way to get customers is through distribution channels. So you need to understand what your distribution channels are, how they work, and what the metrics on those channels look like. So think about pricing and distribution even before you think about product. How will you get it into the user's hands? What will it take for them to convert? And then how are you going to find more customers via those same channels, and what's the cost of acquisition of each of those customers? Uncontrolled distribution leads to all kinds of profit bleeding and headaches. It's very, very difficult to manage if you don't keep those metrics and if you don't focus and segment off your target market population. A proven management team. So 100% of the slides need to include something about why a founder fits within a particular product and why their track record in the past is going to make them successful. One of the things I like to ask founders who come to me or who ask for investment is, have you done this before, and what makes me believe that you're going to be able to do it again? If you can't really answer that, that's probably a sign that it's too early to be seeking funding. Another way to think about it is, are you the person who needs to build this product? Will the world be worse off if you do not go ahead and do what you're doing? If there's someone else who can compete on an equal level with what you're doing, perhaps your defensive strategy is not strong enough. You need to really think about all those factors because you will be asked that by venture capital investors. A weak competitive landscape. This is one of the most important things to think about, especially in international markets. So we hear a lot about derivative companies, the Uber of this. A good example is I just saw a company that's an Uber of mountain climbing equipment. So you can borrow, somebody will lend you mountain biking equipment or an Airbnb of mountain climbing equipment to go ahead and go mountain climbing. Well, that's such a niche market with very few customers. I'm sure that they can find whatever it is, but that's not very interesting from a scalability standpoint. And not only that, but the competitive landscape is very, very open. There's no defensive strategy. The way to think about a weak competitive landscape is in that disk drive to cloud example. Are you literally changing the rules of the game? And Peter Thiel says this best. Globalization means copying things that work. There's no innovation. It's going from one typewriter to 100 typewriters. Technologization, on the other hand, involves doing new things. True technology means going from a typewriter to a word processor. Think about your product that way and whether you make that kind of leap. A strong economic model, which includes customer acquisitions, revenue, margins, and contributions over time. You need to be able to scale this, metric it out, understand how many users there are worldwide. And when you're starting a startup, the thing that you need to prove is that people will pay for your service. I understand Facebook and many other startups do not charge for their services. But guess what? Facebook has billions of users. And unless you intend for your startup to have over 100 million users, you better figure out a way to charge for it. The elevator pitch, one summary that describes it all. I think my favorite is by Manu Kumar, who talks about frequency, density, and pain. And the way he talks about it is in an Uber competitor named Lyft. He originally invested in a company called ZipRide. ZipRide's business model was such that if you wanted to go from Warsaw to Krakow, you could get on Facebook and find other people going in that direction, jump in a car with them, and drive over. That was the transaction that was part of ZipRide. What they found was that that wasn't frequent enough. There were not enough people interested in that, and the pain of doing that wasn't all that big because you could fly, you could take a train, you could rent a car, you could do a number of other things to get around. Now compare that to Lyft or Uber, where the pain of flagging down a cab or maybe having an experience where you can't relate to the driver or overpaying or being uncertain that your cab is going to arrive, those are all painful experiences, and Uber or Lyft solve those experiences, and the frequency and density of those experiences is much bigger. So think about frequency, density, and pain. The other thing Manu recommends is thinking about what passion, mission, vision is. And I think that Mary Meeker at Kleiner Perkins does a great job of describing this as well. So for consumer type of products, you do need to be passionate about what you're doing. But when you're thinking about enterprise or B2B products, passion isn't that big a deal. What's much more important is the pain point that you solve for the organization in order to make that organization stronger. How to pick investors in Silicon Valley. So now once you've got your pitch deck together, you've put it on, you've made it standard, you know what slides you've got, 19 slides, people are going to give you 4 minutes to take a look at it, and you've gotten past that first stage. They've given you a term sheet, and you've got to analyze whether or not you're going to choose this investor. What are the things you should be considering? Well, first off, before you even do that, there are a ton of ways to get funding now in the USA. There's angel funding, there's crowdfunding, there's seed funding, there's obviously venture funding. That makes the opportunities and the leverage that you have as an entrepreneur a lot better than they've ever been in the past. Polish companies raising money in the USA have a very simple process of doing so. They can set up a corporation over there, they can have a subsidiary over here, and it works. There are some attorneys here that can help with that. It's a very straightforward process, and it should cost you anywhere between $25,000 and $50,000. But what's most important is thinking about your investor as a long-term relationship. And when you think about investments as a long-term relationship, think about it as any relationship. You need to build rapport, you need to trust each other, and you need to understand what your weaknesses are and what your strengths are. Most entrepreneurs make their decision based on perceived brand, past success, and ability to intro. But Mark Schuster, who is a two-time entrepreneur who sold his company to Salesforce twice and has now turned a venture capitalist, writes a blog called Both Sides of the Table, meaning he's been an entrepreneur and a venture capitalist. His advice on this is spot on, and what he says is look at the portfolio list of all of the investors. Sure, take a look at what the ones that have been successful and say, gosh, I really hope that's me. But also, take a look at the ones that have been not successful, or take a look at the ones that are struggling. Call them and call several people on their management team. Why? Because when you're successful, you love your VC. You love everybody who's been involved with your organization. You're successful. When you're not successful, guess what? That's when the problems arise. And that's when you see whether a venture capitalist is actually helpful or detracting, or distracting, or problematic, or can't solve issues. And those are the things that are very, very important in startups. One thing that is very, very true, and it's true of every single startup that I've been involved with, there's always internal conflict. It doesn't matter whether it's between founders or whether it's between management teams. When you're working in high intense environments, you are going to have arguments, you're going to have friction, and it's going to be very, very difficult to resolve those issues. Facebook had them, Google had them, Apple had them, Microsoft had them. These are all very legendary stories. Twitter has them all the time. So the people that can come in there and facilitate, the people who can referee those kinds of issues, those are the kinds of people you want in your organization because they're actually going to add value. The people who detract, who take sides, who don't know how to resolve those issues, they're going to ruin your corporation. So be very, very careful about this. One of the things that's super exciting about being here in Poland is that the global trends have made it easier than ever to start a startup anywhere in the world. And we're going to talk about those now. First off, are we in a boom? That's what I hear all the time. There's a technology bubble, there's a funding bubble, all these enormous valuations, too much money running around, too few entrepreneurs, etc. We are not in a technology bubble, we're not in a funding bubble. Where we are is in a boom. We might be in a bubble in 2 or 3 quarters or in 2 or 3 years, but we're not there now. So this is a great time to take advantage of where we are, which is a boom. And there's nothing that quite tells that like a chart. At the same time, it's become twice as expensive to build a company in Silicon Valley as anywhere else. Rising rental costs, housing costs, educational costs, talent costs, all these things have made it so that it costs way more to do a startup than it did even 5 years ago. Now, why is that positive? Because if you're outside of Silicon Valley, you can be lean and you can be strong and you can take a lot less money and perhaps even a lot less dilution when you're doing so. So what are the global trends that you should be paying attention to be competitive with Silicon Valley, even though you're not there? Well, let's look at them. Over the past 5-6 years, smartphone costs have been declining. That means more people can afford smartphones and you can build applications for those smartphones. More powerful phones mean more potential for powerful apps. Bandwidth costs are declining. That means more video streaming, more ability to get more engaging kind of content out there. Computing costs, they've all declined. So it takes much less than it used to operate even a high data, big data startup or something that requires intense computing power. That's a competitive advantage. This is a fascinating slide. Each computing cycle results in a 10x multiplication of adoption of that type of platform. So when we started off with mainframe computers in the 1960s, there were 1 million units that were shipped. Mini computers, 20 years later, in the 1980s, 10 million. The PC became a 100 million unit business. A desktop internet brought in 1 billion users, and now we're in mobile internet. Tablets, mobile phones account for 10 billion units. Where's the next step? There are going to be 100 billion units of something, probably beacons. Mobile traffic is a percentage of internet traffic, an amazing trend. And again, remember, Poland is number 5 on this chart worldwide. The average across the world is 25%. Poland is at 52%, and it's rising fast. Take advantage. Smartphones have lots of upside. Thinking about what smartphones can do, the security involved in smartphones, what kind of information you can provide to smartphones, that provides to market opportunity. And the thing is, mobile is constantly changing. When you look at who the best players were in mobile 10 years ago, they were Nokia and BlackBerry and Linux. Those companies are gone. Everything is completely flipped and turned upside down. And in 10 years, it's going to happen again. So change creates opportunity, and looking where those changes occur is hugely important. Tablets are one area that's growing super fast, and they're growing faster than a personal computer ever did. When you look at the growth of tablets, it may reach a peak at some point, but at this point, it's growing almost linearly. The number of mobile and tablets shipped is already 5 times the number of TVs and PCs shipped over time. That's incredible. So again, focusing on mobile, figuring out what it is that you can do here, it's terrific. So how big will streaming mobile video be in 5 years? Again, the uptrend for this is amazing. When you think about why Meerkat was able to come out of nowhere and become this company everybody's heard of in 18 months, it's because of this mega trend that Piotr Wilam described yesterday. Follow the mega trends, ride the wave, and you might be able to become the next Meerkat. How big will mobile streaming video be in 5 years? Well, look at how much time is spent looking at it today. 9.9 hours a day is spent looking at screens by average consumers. For me, that's definitely true. 2.8 hours of that is on mobile phones, and 30% of that now is for video. So looking at these trends and identifying whether there's a fit between the kind of technology that you're working with, the kinds of passions that you have, the problems that you want to solve, and then identifying whether there are niches within that, that's a positive way to find good startup ideas that are fundable. Cloud technology apps are challenging physical product pain points. We already talked about the disk drive versus cloud computing. Now let's talk about some other things. A TV remote control is now being replaced by Amazon Fire. Hailing a cab used to be painful, now everybody uses Uber. Driving in traffic, you get stuck, you don't know where you are, now just use Waze. Satellite radio, Spotify has taken that over. And booking a hotel room, the biggest hotel reservation system in the world does not own one piece of real estate. That's quite amazing. Here's something that's near and dear to Kraków and Poland in particular. Sensors are growing at 30% per year. Where will they be in 5 years? Think about what other products can be made to take advantage of this global mega trend. Again, Piotr Wilam talked about this in detail yesterday. User-generated content is 2/3 of all content. How is this organized? Sharing content is not slowing down. Where does it all go? Does it need to be organized? Will it be helpful if it is? I'll tell you one thing that would be helpful is if I could organize all of my photos. I'm sure you as well. It would take me weeks to get it all together, but there are 1.8 billion photos uploaded daily, so this is not a problem I have that's unique to me. This is a problem globally. If you can figure out a way to tag and organize photos for people, you'll be a unicorn many times over. So which way are mobile apps moving? So one thing that we're noticing about mobile apps is people are not researching information. What they're doing is sharing with friends, and they're finding specific things that they need on the mobile app itself. WhatsApp has 50 billion messages sent per day. Snapchat has 700 million snaps shared per day. Tinder is incredible, 800 million swipes per day. Bitcoin wallets, this is not going away. Too many smart people believe this is here to stay. And so the blockchain, I just met an entrepreneur from Poland who was working on a blockchain, has some really positive momentum. No doubt about it, this is something that investors are interested in. If this is part of your background, focus on it. Online education, Brainly. I met an investor who puts together an education conference here every year. Online education is still broken. People are not completing their courses. There's a limited amount of sort of penetration between folks using it and getting the value out of it. You can still fix this. And here's something that's really exciting to me. So the thing that's coming out right now and that's most current is that the global economy is changing towards an on-demand worker. Uber, Airbnb, all these platforms that are enabling people to earn money on the side are super exciting. But the thing about them is that they are now drawing the ire of regulators. So they're becoming so big that governments are stepping in, causing problems, and making opportunities for entrepreneurs to fix those problems. So think about what a problem is as a result of some of this recent legislation, regulation, problematic things, and can you help solve that problem for an entrepreneur who's using all of these platforms to earn additional cash online? So changing the workforce brings tides of change. Freelancers and entrepreneurs say that they use social networking as a matter of networking. Internet makes it easier to find work, have done online freelancing projects in the past month, and can find a gig online in less than 24 hours. Enabling these individuals to find better opportunities is an opportunity within itself. Jobs and work has evolved. People don't want to work for big organizations. They don't want to work for government. They want to have independence and flexibility. Evolution of communications has also changed. So part of the macro trend of a changing workforce is that they're now communicating in different ways. Smaller groups, small messages, more frequent communications. How do you go ahead and take advantage of those opportunities to get your message across? It used to be that you would broadly distribute whatever message was out there on Facebook and it went to all your friends. Now with WhatsApp, with Snapchat, with other more limited communication systems, your communications are much more focused. So this is a super busy slide, but it's going to talk a little bit about growth hacking and how to find the users that you need. And I'm going to use myself as an example because, as I said, I've developed this Silicon Valley database of knowledge that can go ahead and be searched and accessed and indexed. And part of my reason for being here is to find whether entrepreneurs find it valuable. So what is a major premise of building a minimum viable product? You have to build a product users love, find a way for them to discover it, and then everything else is details. This is Jeremy Liu from Lightspeed Venture Partners, a good friend of mine, and he's also a really, really smart investor. So what I've done is I've gone and growth hacked LinkedIn and Twitter. I connect with 2,000 legitimate entrepreneurs per month on Twitter, and I add 500 legitimate entrepreneurs per week on LinkedIn. I know how to go ahead and find the people that are going to be interested in my product. I know how to tell them about it, and I know how to get them to go ahead and try it out. That's what you need in order to grow your business. And this is what 500 Startups Marvin Lau talked about twice already. He said, oh, there you are. Hey, Marvin. Distribution and sales, right? 500 startups. One of the hardest things to do is find how you're going to distribute your product efficiently. And if you can find users to try it out, that's a positive thing. So what is Silicon Valley Counsel and why is it so different? So I'm going to talk the last few slides talked about communications and that they're getting shorter, they're being more limited, they're being more focused on specific types of groups. And they talked about entrepreneurs and freelancers moving to an on-demand economy and having their own independence. So what are we finding that is interesting? First, networks effects, lean operations, founder fit, pricing, sales, and distribution execution are competitive advantages that you need to have in order to address this market. An idea includes the size and growth of the market, the growth and defensibility strategy, and not just the product. That's what Y Combinator will tell you. That's what 500 Startups will tell you. If you're looking for business ideas, find a place where resources are squandered and fix it. I'll point out Marvin again as an example because I was speaking with him yesterday and he says, gosh, there's so much inefficiency in Wall Street. Wall Street takes and extracts value when they go ahead and provide these financial instruments. Wouldn't it be something if you could go ahead and take those wasted resources and give them back to the consumer and make it a more efficient process? Absolutely. Find a place where resources are squandered and fix it. So how do entrepreneurs get the information they need when they need it? Right now, they have to go to expensive consulting or law firms, schedule time with busy angel advisors, or research this enormous amount of information on the internet, and all they're doing is putting together the pieces of the puzzle. They still don't quite understand how it all flows together, and that's a problem. That's why we're all here today, to learn more, to understand how it all works, to be competitive, and to be stronger. Instead of reading 200-page books or 1,000 blog posts, who has time for that kind of commitment? These are incremental solutions that leave a lot of value for the solution you think is best. And that's, by the way Dustin Moskovitz thinks about startups and thinks about business ideas. He founded Facebook along with Mark Zuckerberg. So the way to think about these things is resources that are inefficient, and can you go ahead and decrease that friction in order to make it more efficient and extract a little bit of value for that to yourself while providing a lot more value to the consumer. And finally, putting your thoughts into spreadsheets forces you to come to grips with your idea. Do you have a really good idea or not? Well, Product Hunt has 1 million upvotes in their first year. Entrepreneurs want to discover new pieces of information. Mattermark has identified 1 million startups worldwide of various sizes. Each of these startups has multiple entrepreneurs within each company. LinkedIn lists 3 million entrepreneurs worldwide. And the freelance market, according to Kleiner Perkins, is 53 million people, 30% of the US population. And in Europe, Latin America, other places, people are doing the same things. So these are mega trends, as Piotr Willem identified, that can be targeted as your market, and solutions for those individuals, for that market, are things that are in demand. Finally, technology has changed communications. You know, it used to be that if you wanted to meet a spouse or a significant other, you'd go to a nightclub in the USA. 70,000 matchups are made that way in the USA every year. But Tinder has 800 million swipes per day, 11 million matches per day. So technology has made a completely different way to communicate, particularly for millennials. Here's my hypothesis. The ultimate app, and what people really want out of technology, is to be able to press a button and get instant gratification. That's what you do when you go to Uber. You press a button, a car comes. You press a button on Airbnb, you have a hotel. You know what? It even works for your automobile. You turn the key, and all of a sudden you have a vehicle that can drive you anywhere. Think about designing your product to have instant gratification with the push of a button. My other hypothesis, and this is from working with many, many entrepreneurs, is that entrepreneurs have no time, and entrepreneurs are relentlessly resourceful. So what they want is the shortest bit of a resource in order to be able to analyze and make decisions. One way that is possible is to give entrepreneurs or any business people information in bullet points. I am sure that the last time you have read a 1,000-word email, you've rolled your eyes and said, I can't believe this person wrote this long email to me. Why wouldn't they just put it into bullet points? This is the way we want to communicate in the future. That's my hypothesis. What are my assumptions? Well, millennials will value short-form communications to learn information. Again, the freelancer market is a significant and growing portion of workers in the United States. 53 million people, 34% of the workforce. Millennials, ages 15 to 35, are the largest generation in the workforce this year, 35%. It's almost 20 million people. Which 3 benefits would millennials most value from an employer? Training and development, flexible working hours, and cash bonuses. If you can give people education, how to be better in what they do, if you can give them flexibility and independence to do it from anywhere, and if you can put money in their pocket, I believe that they will value your product. So segment the market and find the users. I've already talked about how I've been able to growth hack both Twitter and LinkedIn in order to gain the kinds of users that should be able to try the platform. So here's something that's very true of millennials. They're very tech savvy, they prefer to collaborate online, they use smartphones for work purposes, and they're much more likely to download applications in order to use it for work or training and development purposes than anyone has in the past. In other words, this is a trend that's going to continue over the next 2, 3 to 5 years and provide millennials more ways to work with smartphones and modern communications. Okay, so I think this is really the end of my presentation. There were a few more slides, but this is a previous version. What I'd like to do is open it up for questions, and I'm happy to demonstrate the platform that I built to anybody who's interested after the presentation to show you how you can use it in order to make better business decisions for your startup. And you can access it online. It's live right now. Just go to siliconvalleycounsel.com. Sign in. You need to access via LinkedIn. You just press that button. You'll go ahead and sign in, and you'll see a long list of bullet points that's organized, tweetable, shareable. Also, find me on Twitter, Shimap and Silicon Valley Counsel, and I'll look forward to connecting and networking with all of you. Thank you for your time, and please ask questions.
Woo! That was awesome. May I call you Mary from now on? Okay, guys, questions. This is a very, very good opportunity to ask very good questions. Come on, guys. There we go.
Thank you. Peter, you shared a little bit of the experience and also shared at the beginning what investors are looking for. But in your experience, what the entrepreneurs are looking for when they reach out to you or when they reach out to investors? I mean, obviously money, right? But outside of money, what they're really looking for?
Yeah, excellent question. So first, let me start off with a common mistake entrepreneurs make when they reach out to me. They ask me whether I'll introduce them to angel or seed investors. And if you're an entrepreneur with whom I do not have a previous relationship, with whom we've not worked together, it's the equivalent of asking me to introduce you to my good-looking friend. Since I don't know anything about you, it's a risk for me to do so. It's a waste of time for him or her, and I don't know if it's going to be a connection. So if it doesn't work out, it actually makes me look bad. So that's one thing to avoid to start off with. But the things that I can help with is if you send me your pitch deck and if you ask me, hey, what kind of investors would be interested in this, and what do you think that there's value here? What would be your critique? I can give you 30 minutes to sort of talk it through, and if you like what you hear from me, then we can sort of talk about whether it makes sense to build from here and make your venture better in the ways that I described in order to make that more presentable. And of course, you have to have kind of the things that I described. You have to have the right traction, you have to have the right product, you have to be ready. But if you're ready, then I can make it so when you speak with investors, and you can talk to Camille and Tomasz, who just presented next door about this, I can give you the tools to make you much, much stronger and be able to close that deal.
Okay, more questions. There we go. Don't make me beg.
Hello, Peter.
Hello.
I'm Paweł Maj from Scalen Ventures. I would like to ask you to comment on the comment assumption regarding investors from the US. In Poland, there is a belief that investors from the US will not invest in Polish company, Polish startup, unless they move their headquarters, unless they move their founders or management team to the Silicon Valley. They will not invest in a company that they will not have the team right by their hand for the networking purposes, building value, checking on the company. In your experiences, very vast experience, do you think it's true anymore, or is there a change in the perception?
It's a great question, and I think it's generally true. I think it's a very tough thing to invest long-term for venture capitalists. Having said that, it is possible to do what a lot of companies like Estimote and others are doing, which is set up US headquarters for a sales and marketing team and keep a technical team there. And investors are much more open to that than they were even 1, 2, 3, 4 years ago. And so I think that the overall thought process is investors can identify value and they can identify where they can add value. And if there's a match that's right, then where you are isn't as important. But let's look at what companies get most funded in Silicon Valley. If you're a Stanford Graduate School of Business graduate, you've got an advantage. If you've worked at Google in product development or Microsoft or Apple, you've got a competitive advantage. If you know people in the network who can vouch for you, you've got a competitive advantage. Polish entrepreneurs internationally, they don't have that competitive advantage. So they have to make it up in a very significant way, and they can only make it up with talent. But talent rises above. So that would be the way I would think about it.
Okay. More questions. We'll take one more. Last one. No one? I'll make the last one. So you've been, how long have you been living in the Bay Area?
14 years.
14 years. So in your 14 years experience, Are you seeing the Bay Area, specifically Silicon Valley, are you seeing it better than before? Are you seeing it the same? Or are you seeing a decline in what's happening in Silicon Valley? Or are you going to need to change your URL at some point? And say, I don't know, Berlin Valley Counsel or something like that?
Yeah, the branding on this might change, particularly with sort of the way this expands. But absolutely, I think that the Valley now is more open and democratic than it's ever been before. And the reason is because it takes so much less money to start a startup today. Back when I started 14 years ago, it would take about a 3 million to 5 million Series A financing to build a company from scratch to kind of get to that first level. Now decrease that by 10 times. It takes $300,000 to $500,000. What does that mean? It means that 10 times more companies can be funded, one of which will then make it on to that next stage. But the one that does goes through that Darwinian process and becomes a much stronger company. So the Series A companies that are out there are stronger than they were before, and they continue to grow, which is why you're seeing these incredible valuations so quickly, because the ones that make it can scale so quickly because of all these global effects, this reduction in smartphone costs, reduction in bandwidth, reduction in computing costs, while at the same time the platforms make it possible to reach many more people.
So is that a yes? Is it stronger than before?
I think it is, because diversity creates strength, and evolution means that the strongest survive. Yeah.
Okay, Peter, thank you very much. Peter, big round of applause for Peter. That was fantastic having you on stage, mister. Thank you very much.